In this tutorial, we're going to be covering how to make tiling animations. These are animations that tile in 3D space, and they often take textures that are 2D and wrap them into a cylinder according to their tiling, and then they move that tiling through space, as you can see in this example in the lower right, titled Abyss by the generative artist Etienne Jacob. On his Twitter, you can see many really fascinating examples of looping and tiling. Often they're using things like torus shapes and cylinder shapes. And the thing about a cylinder is that it tiles. So imagine a 2D image that tiles according to one axis. Well, you just have to wrap it around that axis, and then you have a nice pattern that repeats on a cylinder. So in this tutorial, we're going to be talking about how to do tiling patterns with generative noise in TouchDesigner. And these concepts, you can inspect the code in here and apply them to things like processing or other animation softwares. So to start, we'll get to this example midway through the tutorial, but to start, we're just going to talk about how to do tiling in one dimension, and then tiling in terms of 2 dimensions, so both the x-axis and the y-axis tiling, and then this is a cool looping in time animation. So you can see that the noise is generative here and it's rotating, but I can make it, I'm customizing the parameters here, so it's going to loop over this time. So if I set it to 1, then it loops every 1 second. I'll lower that a bit so it's every 5 seconds, and I can change things like the translation and the rotation. And you can also provide input UV here to do this, but we'll start out simpler. So the first example is tiling one-dimensional. So this tox is on my GitHub, so you can download it. So we're providing a ramp, and the ramp has to be from 0 to 1. And you can see the noise here just with a top to chop, and we can control the period with this slider here. And you can see that the left value here is the same as the right value down there, even when I change the period. So the solution to getting a different appearance here is not to change the value here. This ramp should always go from 0 to 1. Instead, it's to play with the values here. And you can see with the cycle that with a pretty large period that the pattern becomes pretty obvious that this is in fact a neat tiling, and the transform top that has been set to scale on the x-axis is also confirming that there isn't a visible seam in between the repetition. And inside, what it's doing is it has 2 noises, and it's just that the second UV to this, the UV to the second noise is a kind of function based on the input ramp. So it's actually the first thing minus vec4 1. And it turns out that if you map them together, if you crossfade between these two according to this ramp, the red channel in this ramp, then you actually get a tiling pattern. So the next example is tiling 2D. So in this thing, we are kind of sending in a ramp, but instead we're sending in an RG 2-channel image, and so it's going from 0 to 1 on the x-axis, the red channel, and it's also going from 0 to 1 on the y-axis, the green channel. And so again, you change the period by going here and changing this period. So you shouldn't really manipulate this, you just want to manipulate it here. And you can see that this is our kind of proof that it's tiling correctly, that we don't see a visible seam. And if we change the period, you can see this repetition here that it's tiling correctly. And the way this works is kind of similar to the first one, but you may have a guess that this involves 2 noises and blending them together, because we are blending from on 1 dimension. So when you do 2 dimensions, you actually have to have 4 noises. So what's happening is that this UV is the input UV to this noise, but then the UVs to the other noises have to be variations of this one. And so the first one is actually the input -1 in the red channel, and the second one is -1 in the green channel, and then this one down here, the last one, is -1 on both the red and the green channel. And so now you get these 4 different noises that all have the same parameters. You can see that me confirming that with the bullet icon. And then it turns out that if you do a weighted average of these four things based on the input channels here, you can see that in the shader here, then this is the weighted average of the four noises. I take RG and then I take 1 minus R and 1 minus G, and it turns out that if you put these coefficients in front of the noises and you weight them together, then you actually get a tiling image. So the next example is tiling in terms of 3D space. Sorry, not 3D space, but actually in terms of time. And so this is only two noises because we have like this starting noise and then we have the second noise, and the point is that you're doing a crossfade from one noise to the next, and so by the time you fade out of this one and you've fully transitioned to this one, this noise is actually where this one had started at the very beginning of the animation, and that's what that crossfade is doing. So you might be wondering, well, how do I make something that is tiles in terms of both two dimensions, x and y, and also in terms of a third dimension, time? And so that would actually involve 8 noises total, because this is 2 here and this is 4 here, and so you keep needing to multiply them together. But it turns out that for examples like 18 Jacobs animation here, you only need simple things. So the acronym, I guess, is KISS, keep it simple, stupid. So just try to use simpler tiling patterns such as this one-dimensional one. And so we'll actually, I'll walk you through now recreating this animation using just simpler cases of the noise tiling. So to start, in my geometry viewer, you can see that this shape is made up of 4 layers. And now going clockwise, I call these things slices, like pizza slices, and then going from inward to outward, I call those things rings. So I have a custom parameter here, and the custom parameter is rings, layers, slices. So we're going to store rings in the x-axis, layers in the, or it's going to be red, green, blue, X, Y, Z. So just remember rings, layers, slices, because I'm going to say that over and over again. And so, for each of those things, the number of items that we have is 30 times 40 times 70. And so that is expressed right here with this parameter, and then multiply them all together. And so this is a component that tells you what the shape of your texture needs to be in order to get 8400 pixels. So it's 8400, and then it tells me that my texture should be 100 by 84 conveniently, and so it turns out that this is 8400 pixels. And so what's actually happening here, if I do view as points, you can see that we've actually stored our information in terms of the 3 channels. But what's interesting about the shader in here, the shader technique in here, is that it's very similar to how tensors work in things like NumPy or TensorFlow or PyTorch. These things take, normally we think of matrices as 2-dimensional objects. You've just got a row and a column. But the thing about tensors is that they are flexible in terms of their number of dimensions. Like a tensor is a matrix, but it extends to as many dimensions as you want it to. And so in this case, we have basically a 3-dimensional tensor. But this technique here, this shader that does this technique of finding out what unique ID you are among all of the 8400 pixels. So this ID here is going from 0 to 8399. And now you're just doing this technique where you're doing modulus by one of the dimensions and then dividing by that dimension, and you'll actually end up getting a unique kind of hashtag, or not hashtag, hash ID. You have your unique ring ID, layer ID, and slice ID, and so that combination that you store in this texture is unique for that pixel. So this technique is a 3-dimensional tensor, you could say, which is conveniently visualized by this mode of view as image. But this technique here actually extends possibly to higher dimensional tensors. So that could be really interesting for patterns. I hope that makes sense here of what the data is in here. So we've got rings, layers, slices. We'll just go back to color mode. And next, what we do over here is we convert these integers. So these numbers are going from, for instance, the number of rings is 30, 4, and 79. So the red channel is going to be an integer from 0 to 29, layers is 0 to 3, and slices is 0 to 69. And so we have all of these integers stored in here. And so we actually want to convert those integers into percentages, because percentages are easier to work with in terms of tiling, as I demonstrated earlier in that tiling talks. So we have to take our numbers, for instance, 0 through 29, and if we divide that by 30, then that's a good number between 0 and 1. So that's all that's happening here. So we take our x-axis, the rings, and we divide by actually this, well, I'll explain the z one first. So actually we chose, I'm going to open this here, we chose 70. So now we know actually that the slices is going to, the z channel here is going to go from 0 to 1. But the x channel, we've actually chosen to do mod 10 and then actually divide by 10. So we have 30 rings, but we're actually doing modulus 10 and then we're dividing by 10. And so that's the trick here. So if I were to actually show you this animation, we've got, if I were to pause it, I'll pause it. If I were to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, then that's the animation. That's the point at which the cycle occurs. So we kind of move our things falling into the abyss by 10 rings. And so we're going to make a tiling pattern that we're going to take advantage of reshaping our thing that goes from 0 to 70 into this thing that goes from where we're doing modulus 10 and then dividing by 10, and so we have this repetition. So you can think of it as pretend that this is actually 70 pixels long, but what we want to end up with is actually a tiling pattern that happens every 10 pixels. So that's what's happening there. And the Y channel, we actually don't care about the layers because we're not going to be doing a tiling with regard to the layer. But we're going to be doing a tiling with the rings because that's how we're going to accomplish the seamless loop in terms of time. And we're doing a tiling in terms of the 70 slices, and so that's why we have to remap our slice ID from 0 to 69 to a number between 0 and 1, because we're going to get a data that we can wrap cylindrically and tile it that way. So here we just zero out the Y channel because we don't really care about it, and here we get the red channel and the blue channel. So I was explaining earlier that these numbers are 0 to 1, and so you focus on just the red channel. So everything here is 0 to 1. Focus on just the blue channel. That's the slices. So everything here is 0 to 1 as well. I will, but I'll hold on this for a minute, and we'll go up here to this shader. So this shader, we have rings, layers, slices. And it has these custom parameters for timer. Timer is our animation, and we knew that our mod slice is 10 because we chose the number over here. This number here is from a custom parameter, and this is also that same number. And so every time the timer loops, we need to shift the ID in terms of the mod slices. So again, the numbers that are going into this thing in the red channel are from 0 to 29, and so we need to replace them by 10. So we're shifting the x-axis by 10 according to the U timer. And additionally, we have this parameter U slice offset, and that is kind of just a fudge factor in order to get the animation so that you're not rendering the wrong part of the animation. I'll demonstrate that right now. If I open up this custom parameter, you can see that if I choose a wrong ring offset, I'm visualizing it here. If I choose a wrong ring offset, then maybe our animation is going to look like this, and so it's not getting to the to the generative part that we want. So it turns out that -4 is ring offset. If I make it too negative, then they're all the way down there. So it turns out that the correct value is -4. We're shifting our x value, the ring identifier, in terms of time, so that it loops there. So that's kind of taking care of the looping animation. And the noise tiler, I'm going to turn off all of the noise. And so if I just turn off that noise and I turn off that noise, you can see that this shader is just this is black. Because I've set the brightness to 0, and the same thing here, I've set that thing to 0. So what's happening in this shader is we are animating according to the not time. You can see that there's no time component on this, and so the animation is purely a function of the ring identifier. So where we are in terms of that red, or that red channel, that ring, then that's going to affect our y value. Time is actually coming from time is actually this animation that is, or this value that is based on the ring. So I kind of treat the input red channel as the time value. So acceleration downward is time squared, negative time squared, or time squared times negative gravity, but gravity is already negative here. And so what we want to do is to add noise into this function, but that noise is going to tile according to our other dimensions. We'll do it one by one. So this is no noise, and it looks pretty ordinary. And so now I'm going to I'm going to switch this cross to the very first input, so we're only focusing on this. And I will also turn off the noise. And so the red channel, let's see. The red channel is the rings. So what we're doing here is, remember, the ring has been normalized from 0 to 1, and this is our input to our tiling thing, and so this is going to tile according to our ring. And so if you can have an imagination here, you can imagine that we're kind of disturbing or perturbing the animation, the input number, the noise into our animation that determines how early you fall into the abyss here. And so if I were to make this period very small, then our actually 10 rings, because the modulus factor was 10, our 10 rings are all falling randomly from each other if I make this even smaller. And so that can actually look strange, because you might have a ring that's pretty far back here, and it might fall before a ring that is over here. So you can see that. But if I make the period large, then we have a tiling pattern. I'll make it even larger. Then they're all kind of falling more sequentially as to be expected. And so we can add additional variation to their falling based on the blue channel. So the blue channel is the slices. That's the pattern that's going to repeat clockwise, cylindrically. So if we switch now fully to the blue channel, now we see this interesting pattern. So there's this, you don't see a breaking seam as you go clockwise around. So if I adjust these parameters, if I make the period here very small, then you can see that they're all becoming like more disconnected from each other. It's as if each slice has an offset into the animation that is very different from its neighbor. And maybe this, I can adjust the amplitude here up a lot. And I'll change the period back to something more reasonable. And now I'll just crossfade between these two noises. So that maybe is looking interesting. So we've got variation based on the inward-outward ring slice, or ring, I should say, and then we've also got this tiling noise that's occurring according to the slice. So I'll turn this off again, and now we have another kind of noise, and that noise is based on the layer separation. So you can see that if I pause it, we've got 4 layers, but all layers fall at the same time. What we actually want is there to be a little bit of separation among the different layers. And so that separation should occur with noise, and it should occur probably with tiling, so that maybe there's a cluster over here where, you know, the 4 layers all fall very closely together, but then over time, as you go clockwise around, the layers fall more separately. But then if you make a full circle, then you have to, you know, complete the tiling pattern, and so they should fall closely together again to match the beginning. So that's what this is doing here. So if I turn off this brightness of 0 and I go to the very first one, so then we've got the red channel, which is the rings. So you know, that's demonstrating the variation in layer falling. And now if I go according to the slice, the kind of the radius from the center. And now if I go to the other one, this is looking interesting. This is taking the blue channel, which is the slices, and so you know, maybe I should make this period pretty larger so that it's easier to see. So even larger probably. Actually the scale here is a little silly. That's a little confusing, so that's why these values are a little confusing. But all right, so that's making the pattern probably more clearly visible. So there's a point at which all of them are falling together, but then over here maybe they're falling more separately, and by the time you make the full circle backwards, they're falling more together again. So now we can maybe increase or decrease that period a little bit more, and crossfade again to the other thing, and so now we've got our interesting pattern. So now this is our texture that is instancing all of these things, and so that is we have our kind of a cube, and the cube has been conveniently put in this octant, this octant of positive z, positive x, and negative y. It could have been something else, but that's just going into that's being instanced over here, and the shader over here, which I won't cover in detail, is just, you know, it's taking both the SOP point and it's also taking the position data, and so this is being loaded from the texture. And so the two components you need are the SOP position and the instanced data, and if you know that information, that is enough to displace or instance and place the thing in space. Notice that I haven't put time. I haven't put my time thing on this texture. The time, the looping time is only going to this single texture, and everything else follows from this. So maybe my advice is to try to not export the timer to too many locations. You might just be confusing yourself. Instead, try to get it in just a single location and have everything else follow as a consequence of that in terms of designing how things loop. Finally, the interesting thing is that this is a cylinder because it's tiling in this circular area direction. And if you were to actually unravel that and just turn it into a kind of a flat plane, then you would get this waterfall. And so what what this is demonstrating is that this is actually totally normal instancing. So this is a constant with not any complicated kind of displacement in the shader. It's just an ordinary material. And it turns out that if you take this texture and instance it, you can see that I've applied the translation to RGB, then you get this rectangle. But all that this shader is doing the kind of legwork of taking something that is this data, but it actually tiles here, even though it's not really noticeable to the user. The left side is actually the same as the right side. And so that shader is just warping this waterfall animation into a cylinder, and then that cylinder is falling endlessly, which looks really nice. Lastly, I think I'll point out that the color map, it's pretty good to put this kind of filter on it, 4x. If I don't do that, then the texture that I've put up here looks a little funny. It looks a little blurry. So to wrap up, I would say play around with these, see what you can get. I think the tiling 2D thing is pretty cool because you can apply rotations and you still get nice tiling patterns for noise. Definitely use this one. It's pretty interesting because I can, for instance, turn off translation and I can turn on rotation, and I can even turn on like a zoom. And so this is a crazy like looping noise image that's also rotating and scaling inward. So play around with these. Also, my advice about just trying to use the one-dimensional object. And then separate it into channels and just do one-dimensional at a time, and then crossfade between different noises. And then you can take these input noises and then you just kind of add the noises together. And sometimes you multiply with some other factor, the layer factor. The layer is the integer from the Y channel. And just the final thing again is that this texture is pretty useful. It's only doing a tensor that's three-dimensional, but I think that people could do really interesting things with even higher dimensional tensors. If you have questions or suggestions for topics to do in the future, please let me know. Thanks for watching. Bye.